Hi, everybody, and welcome to NAU Theater Story Hour. Well, today, everybody, it's just me, Miss Kathleen, and some friends that you're going to meet a little bit later. And I am going to read two stories by Beatrix Potter. I'm going to read The Tale of Tom Kitten and The Roly-Poly Pudding, another kitten story. And then I'm going to share with you a story by Rennert Kipling from his Just So stories called How the Camel Got His Hump. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to get started right now with, well, what is that? I have a guest. Hang on a minute, everyone. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. Hello, everybody. I'm Miss Kiki. Well, I'm not really a miss. I'm a little girl. And I came to Story Hour today to say hello. I can't wait to hear these stories. Yep. You hear that?
I do hear that.
So let's get started. I think I like Beatrix Potter the very best. I'm gonna go sit down and listen very carefully. See ya in a little bit. Boo, boo, boo.
How the Camel Got His Hump by Rudyard Kipling. Now this is the next tale, and it tells how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of a howling desert because he did not want to work. And besides, he was a howler himself. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles, most excruciatingly idle. And when anybody spoke to him, he said, "Humph, just humph," and no more. Presently, the horse came to him on a Monday morning with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel. And the horse went away and told the man. Presently, the dog came with a stick in his mouth and said, "Camel, oh camel, come fetch and carry with the rest of us, ha ha ha." "Humph," said the camel, and the dog went away and told the man. Presently the ox came to him with a yoke on his back and said, "Camel, oh camel, come plow with the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day, the man called the horse and the dog and the ox together and said, "Oh three, I'm very sorry for you. And the world's so new and all, but that hump thing in the desert can't work or he would be here by now. So I'm going to leave him alone, and you just must work double time to make up for it." That made the three of them very angry, with the world so new and all. And they held a palaver, or an indaba, and a puncheon, In other words, a meeting at the edge of the desert. And the camel came chewing on milkweed, most excruciatingly idle, and laughed at them. Humph! And then he walked away. Presently there came along Djinn, in charge of all the deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Djinn's always travel that way because it's magic. And he stopped to palaver and to meet with those three. Djinn of all the deserts, said the horse, is it right for anyone to be idle with the world so new and all? Certainly not, said Djinn. Well, said the horse, there's this thing in the middle of the howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs, and he hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot. Phew, said Djinn, whistling. That's my camel. For all the gold in Arabia, what does he say about it? He says, humph, said the dog, and he won't fetch, and he won't carry. Does he say anything else? Said Djinn. Only humph, and he won't plow, said the ox. Very good, said Djinn. I'll humph him if you will kindly wait 1 minute. Then Djinn rolled himself up in a dust cloak and took off on a bearing across the desert and found the camel, most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water. My long and bubbling friend, said Djinn, what's this that I hear of your doing no work, with the world so new and all? Humph, said the camel. Then Djinn sat down with his chin on his hand and began to think great magic, while the camel looked at his reflection in the pool of water. You've given the three extra work since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciating idleness, said Djinn, and he went on thinking magics with his chin on his hand. Humph, said the camel. I shouldn't say that again if I were you, said Djinn. You might say it once too often. Bubbles. Bubbles, I want you to work. And the camel said, humph, again, but no sooner had he said it that he saw his back, the one that he was so proud of, puffing up and puffing up into a great lolloping humph. Do you see that? Said Djinn. That is your very own humph, that you've brought on upon your very own self by not working. Today is Thursday, and you have done no work since Monday, when the work began. Now you are going to work. How can I, said the camel, with this humph on my back? That's made a purpose, said Djinn. All because you missed those 3 days. You will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your humph. And don't say I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert, go to those 3 and behave. Humph yourself. And the camel humphed himself, humphed and all, and went away to join the 3. And from that day to this day, the camel always wears the humph. Now, we call it a hump so as not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world. And he has never yet learned to behave. Now, Mr. Rudyard Kipling always adds a poem at the end of his Just So stories. This poem is about the camel, but also about us, about people, both children and adults, who get into a little trouble when they humph all day. So here it is. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see in the zoo. But uglier yet is the hump that we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups, too, ooh, ooh, if we haven't enough to do, ooh, ooh, we get the hump, the Cameelious Hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsily head and a snarly, yarly voice. We shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there's one for you, when we get the hump, the Cameelious Hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still or frowst with a book on the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also and dig till we gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind and the dijon of the garden too have lifted the hump, the horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you, ooh, ooh. If I haven't enough to do, ooh, ooh. We all get hump, Cameelious Hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. And that is the end of How the Camel Got His Hump. Next up, well, you'll have to wait and see. See you in a minute. Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying today. We're doing all kinds of different stories. Well, I'm going to read another story by an author I've read before, and her name is Beatrix Potter, and she's from England. She's written a lot of stories about bunny rabbits. This is a story instead about a kitten, about some naughty kittens who have done some things that maybe they shouldn't have with their new clothes. I have a naughty kitty at home, and his name is Teague. That's a Gaelic name. It's spelled kind of funny for us. It's T-A-G-H-D, but it's pronounced Teague. Anyway, he does a lot of things at home that are kind of bad, but he also is a lovely, lovely, fluffy little boy that I love to pet, and he purrs a lot. As soon as you look at him, he purrs, and he doesn't mean to get in trouble. And I don't think the story that I'm going to read today, that little kitten gets intentionally in trouble either, or his brothers and sisters, just like I don't think Peter Rabbit or Benjamin Rabbit intended to, but they go on adventures, and that's what we're going to read. Before we do, I want to introduce you to Tom Kitten. Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoy my story. Meow. Today, we are working with puppets. And in theater, we love puppets. Puppets can be very expressive, and they come to life. So Tom will be joining us today. So, The Tale of Tom Kitten by Beatrix Potter. And Beatrix dedicates all of her story here to all cats, to Pickles in particular, and she also says, especially to those who get upon my garden wall. So here we go with your story. Once upon a time, there were 3 little kittens, and their names were Mittens, Tom, and Moppet. They had dear little fur coats of their own, and they tumbled about the doorstep and played in the dust. But one day, their mother, Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, expected friends for tea. So she fetched the kittens indoors to wash them and dress them before the fine company arrived. First, she scrubbed their faces, like she did with Moppet. I'll show you with Tom. Oh, scrubby, scrubby, scrubby. Oh, he doesn't like it. Then he brushed their fur like she did with Mittens. And then she combed their tail and their whiskers like she did with Tom. Tom was very naughty, and he scratched. Mrs. Tabitha dressed Moppet and Mittens in clean pinafores and tuckers, and then she took all sorts of elegant, uncomfortable clothes out of the chest of drawers in order to dress up her son, Thomas. When the 3 kittens were ready, Mrs. Tabitha unwisely turned them out into the garden to be out of the way while she made hot buttered toast. Now keep your frocks clean, children. You mustn't walk on your hind legs. Keep them from getting dirty and in that ash pit, and from Sally Hennypenny, and from the pigsty, and from the Puddle Ducks. Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. Boop! And then they stood up, and there were several green smears all over. Let us climb up the rockety and sit on the rock wall, said Moppet. Purr, purr. She turned their pinafores back to front and went up with a skip and a jump. Moppet's white tucker fell down the road. Tom Kitten was quite unable to jump when walking upon his hind legs because of his trousers. He came up to a rockety by degrees, breaking the ferns and shedding buttons right and left. He was all in pieces when he reached the top of the wall. Moppet and Mittens tried to pull him up together, and then his hat fell off, and the rest of his buttons just burst wide open. Moppet and Mittens were very sad. While they were having their own difficulties, there was a pit, a paddle, a pat, and 3 puddle ducks came along the hard road, marching one behind the other and doing their goose step. Pit, paddle, pit, pat, pit, paddle, pit, pat, pit, paddle, waddle, pat. They stopped and stood in a row and stared up at the kittens. They had very small eyes and looked quite surprised. Then the 2 duck birds, Rebecca and Jemima Puddle Duck, picked up the hat and the tucker and put them on. Mittens laughed so that she fell off the wall. Moppet and Tom descended right after her. Their pinafores and all the rest of Tom's clothes came off. See, he has no clothes. "Come, Mr. Drake, Puddle Duck," said Moppet. "Come and help us dress him. Come and button up Tom." Mr. Drake Puddle Duck advanced in a slow sideways manner and picked up the various articles, but he put them on himself. They fitted him even worse than Tom Kitten. "It is a very fine morning," said Mr. Puddle Duck. And he and Jemima and Rebecca Puddle Duck set off about on the road, keeping step, pat, pat, piddle, pat, pit, pat, waddle, pat, step, pat, piddle, pat, poddle, waddle, pat, waddle. Then Tabitha Twitchit came down the garden and found her kittens on the wall, with no clothes on. She pulled them off the wall, nodded at them, and took them back to the house. "My friends will arrive in a minute, and you are not fit to be seen. I am affronted," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. She sent them upstairs. And I'm sorry to say, she told her friends that they were in bed with the measles, which was not true. Quite the contrary. They were not in bed, not in the least. Somehow, there were these very extraordinary noises overhead which disturbed the dignity and repose of the tea party. And I think that someday I shall have to make another larger book to tell you more about Tom Kitten. As for the Puddle Ducks, they went into a pond. The clothes all came off directly because there were no buttons. Remember, they had fallen off. And Mrs. Drake Puddle Duck and Jemima and Rebecca have been looking for them ever since. The end.
That was fun. They got in trouble. Well, we have another story about cats. It's called the Roly-Poly Pudding. It's also by Miss Beatrix Potter. She wrote about types like me too, rats. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, enjoy. I'll see you later.
Hello, everyone, again. I hope you're enjoying the stories today. The last story that we're going to read is called The Roly-Poly Pudding by Beatrix Potter. And this is a fun story. It's a story about more kitty cats. Take two. We're going to tell another story written by Beatrix Potter, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that first one about Tom Kitten. This one is called The Roly-Poly Pudding. And just like the other one, Beatrix Potter has dedicated this story to someone. She dedicated it to Sammy, the intelligent, pink-eyed representative of a persecuted, you'll have to look up that word, but irrepressible race, an affectionate little friend, and most accomplished thief. I think it might be a cat. So here we go. Once upon a time, there was an old cat called Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. We met her last story, remember? And she was a very anxious parent. She used to lose her kittens continually. And whenever they were lost, they were always in mischief. One baking day, she determined to shut them in a cupboard. She caught Moppet and Mittens, but she could not find Tom. Where is Tom? I haven't seen him since the last story. We'll find him later. Mrs. Tabitha went up and down all over the house, mewing for Tom. Tom Kitten. She looked in the pantry, under the staircase, and she searched the best spare bedroom. That was all covered up with dust sheets. She went right upstairs and looked into the attic, but she could not find him anywhere. It was an old house, full of cupboards and passages. Some of the walls were 4 feet thick, and there used to be queer noises inside them, as if there were little secret staircases. Certainly, there were odd little jagged doorways and wainscot, and things disappeared at night, especially cheese and bacon. Uh-oh. Mrs. Tabitha became more and more distracted and mewed dreadfully. While their mother was searching the house, Moppet and Mittens got into mischief. The cupboard door was not locked, so they pushed it open and came out. They went straight into the dough, which was set to rise in the pan on the fire. They patted it and played with it with their little paws. "Shall we make dear little muffins?" said Mittens to Moppet. But just at that moment, somebody knocked at the front door, and Moppet jumped into the flour barrel in fright. Mittens ran away into the dairy and hid in an empty jar on the stone shelf where the milk pan stood. The visitor was a neighbor, Mrs. Ribby. She had called to borrow some yeast. Mrs. Tabitha came downstairs, mewing dreadfully. "Mew, mew, come in, Cousin Ribby, come in, and sit ye down. I'm in sad trouble, Cousin Ribby." And Tabitha, shedding tears, "I've lost my dear son Thomas. I'm afraid the rats have gotten him." She wiped away her tears with her apron. "He's a bad kitten, Cousin Tabitha. He made a cat's cradle of my best bonnet the last time I came to tea. Where have you looked for him?" "All over the house. The rats are too many for me. What a thing it is to have an unruly family," Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit said. "I'm not afraid of rats. I will help you find them and whip him too. What is all that soot and fender? The chimney wants sweeping. Oh dear, dear Cousin Ribby. Now Moppet and Mittens are gone. They both have got out of the cupboard." Ribby and Tabitha set out to search the house thoroughly again. They poked under the beds and Ribby's umbrella and rummaged in the cupboards. They even fetched a candle and looked inside all the clothes in the chest in the attic. They could not find anything, but once they heard the door bang, and they scuttered downstairs. "Yes, it is infested with rats," said Tabitha tearfully. I've caught 7 young ones out one hole in the back of the kitchen, and we had them for dinner just last Saturday. And I once saw the old father rat, an enormous old rat, Cousin Ribby. I was just going to jump on him when he showed his yellow teeth at me and whisked down a hole. The rats get on my nerves, Cousin Rigby, said Tabitha. Ribby and Tabitha searched and searched. They both heard a curious roly-poly noise in the attic floor, but there was nothing to be seen. They returned to the kitchen. Here's one of your kittens at least, said Ribby, dragging Moppet out of the flour barrel. They shook off the flour and set her down on the kitchen floor. She seemed to be a terrible fright. Oh, mother, said Moppet. There's an old woman rat in the kitchen and she stole some of the dough. The 2 cats ran to look at the dough pan. Sure enough, there were marks like scratching fingers, and a lump of dough was gone. Uh-oh, do we know where that dough went? Maybe we do. Which way did she go, Moppet? But Moppet had been so frightened to peep out of the barrel again. Ribby and Tabitha took her and them with them to keep her safe and in sight while they went on their search. They went into the dairy. The first thing they found, guess what it was? Yup, it was Mittens hiding in the empty jar. They tipped the jar open and out scrambled the kitten. Oh, mother, said Mittens. Mother, mother, there has been an old man rat in the dairy, a dreadful, enormous rat, mother, and he's stolen a pat of butter and a rolling pin. Ribby and Tabitha looked at one another. A rolling pin and butter? Oh, my poor son Thomas, exclaimed Tabitha, wiping away her tears with her paws. A rolling pin, said Ribby. Do we not hear a roly-poly noise in the attic when we were looking in the chest? Ribby and Tabitha rushed upstairs again. Sure enough, the roly-poly noise was going on quite distinctly under the attic floor. This is serious, Cousin Tabitha, said Ribby. We must send for John Joiner at once and a saw. Now this is what has been happening to Tom Kitten. Pause. Now, this is what's been happening to Tom Kitten, and it shows it's very unwise to go up a chimney in a very old house where a person does not know his way and where there are enormous rats. Tom Kitten did not want to be shut up in a cupboard. When he saw that his mother was going to bake, he was determined to hide. He looked about for a nice, convenient place, and he fixed upon the chimney. The fire had only just been lighted, and so it was not very hot, but there was a white, choky smoke with green sticks. Tom Kitten got up between the fender and looked up. It was a big, old-fashioned fireplace. The chimney itself was wide enough inside for a man to stand up and walk about, so there was plenty of room for a little kitten, Tom Kitten. He jumped right up onto the fireplace, balancing himself upon the iron bar where the kettles hang. Tom Kitten took another big jump from the bar and landed on the high ledge inside the chimney. knocking down some soot into the fender. Tom Kitten coughed and choked at the smoke. He could hear the sticks beginning to crackle and sizzle and burn in the fireplace down below. He made up his mind to climb right to the top and get out of the slates and try to catch some sparrows outside. I cannot go back. If I slipped, I might fall into the fire and singe my beautiful tail and my little blue jacket. The chimney was very big and old, and a very old one. It was built in the days when people burnt logs of wood upon the hearth. The chimney stack stood high above on the roof like a little stone tower, and the daylight shone down from the top under the slanting slates that kept out the rain. Tom Kitten was very, very frightened. He climbed up and up and up and up and up. Then he waded sideways through inches of soot. He was like a little sweep himself. It was most confusing in the dark. One flue seemed to lead one way and the other into another. There was less smoke, but Tom Kitten felt quite lost. He scrambled up and up and up and up, but before he reached the chimney top, he came to a place where somebody had loosened a stone in the wall. There were mutton bones inside. "This seems funny," said Tom Kitten. "Who's been gnawing on bones in the chimney? I wish I had never come, and what a funny smell. It's something like a mouse, only dreadfully strong. It makes me sneeze. Achoo, mew," said Tom Kitten. He squeezed through the hole in the wall and dragged himself along the most uncomfortably tight passage where there was scarcely any light. He groped his way for several yards. He was at the back of the skirting board in the attic, and there were little marks and He groped his way carefully for several yards. He was way at the back of the skirting board in the attic where there was a little mark. All at once, he fell head over heels in the dark, down a hole, and landed on a heap of very dirty rags. When Tom Kitten picked himself up and looked about, he found himself in a place that he had never ever seen before, although he had lived in the house his entire life. It was a very small and stuffy, fusty room with boards and rafters and cobwebs and plaster. Opposite from him, far away as he could sit, was an enormous rat. "What do you mean, tumbling into my bed, all covered with smuts?" said the rat, chattering his teeth. "Please, sir, the chimney wants sweeping," said poor Tom. Anna Maria! Anna Maria!" There was a pattering noise, and an old woman rat poked her head around the rafter. All in a minute, she rushed upon Tom Kitten, and before he knew what was happening, his coat was pulled off, and he was rolled in a bundle and tied in a string in very hard knots. Anna Maria did the tying. The old rat watched her and took a sniff. When she had finished, they both sat staring at poor Tom Kitten with their mouths open. "Anna Maria," said the old man rat, whose name was Samuel Whiskers, "Anna Maria, make me a kitten dumpling, roly-poly pudding for my dinner." It requires dough and a pat of butter and a rolling pin. And Anna Maria, considering Tom Kitten with her head on one side. No, said Samuel Whiskers. Make it properly, Anna Maria, with bread crumbs. Nonsense, butter and dough, replied Anna Maria. The two rats consulted with each other for a few minutes and then went away. Samuel Whiskers got through a hole in the wainscot and went boldly down the front staircase to the dairy to get the butter. He did not meet anybody. He made a second journey for the rolling pin. He pushed it in front of him with his little paws, and like a brewer's man handling a barrel. He could hear Rigby and Tabitha talking, but when they were much too busy lighting a candle to look into the chest, they did not see him. Anna Maria went down the other way by skirting the board and the window shutter and the kitchen to steal the dough. She borrowed a small saucer and scooped up some dough with her paws. She did not observe Moppet. While Tom Kitten was left alone under the floor of the attic, he wriggled about and tried to meow for help. But his mouth was full of soot and cobwebs, and he was tied up in such a very tight knot, he could not make anybody hear him, except a spider, who came out of a crack of the ceiling and examined the knots critically for safe distance. It was a judge of knots because it had a habit of tying up unfortunate blue bottles. It did not assist him. Tom Kitten wriggled and squirmed until he was quite exhausted. Presently the rats came back and set to work to make him into a dumpling. First, they smeared him with butter and they rolled him in the dough. Will not the string be very indigestible, Anna Maria? Inquired Samuel Whiskers. Anna Maria said she thought it was of no consequence, but she wished that Tom Kitten would hold his head still, as it disarranged the pastry. She laid hold of his ears. Tom Kitten bit and spit and mewed and wriggled, and the rolling pin went roly-poly, roly-poly. The rats held each end of the rolling pin. His tail was sticking out. You did not fetch enough dough, Anna Maria. I fetched as much as I could carry, replied Anna Maria. I do not think, said Samuel Whiskers, pausing to take a look at Tom Kitten. I do not think that will be a good pudding. It smells sooty. Anna Maria was about to argue the point when all at once there began to be other sounds up above. The rasping noise of a saw and the noise of a little dog scratching and arf, 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 yelping. The rats dropped the rolling pin and listened attentively. We are discovered. We are interrupted. Anna Maria, let us collect our property and the others and depart at once. I fear that we shall be obliged to leave this pudding. But I am persuaded that the knots would have proved indigestible whatsoever anyway. You may urge the contrary. Come away at once and help me tie up some mutton bones in a counterpane, said Anna Maria. I've got half a smoked ham hidden in the chimney. So it happened that by the time that John Joiner had got the plank up, there was nobody under the floor except the rolling pin and Tom Kitten in a very, very dirty dumpling. But there was a strong smell of rats John Joiner spent the rest of the morning sniffing and whining and wagging his tail. You see, John Joiner was a dog, and run around with his head in a hole like a gimlet. Then he nailed the plank down again, put his tools in his bag, and came downstairs. The cat family was quite recovered. They invited him to stay for dinner. The dumpling had been peeled off of Tom Kitten and made separately into a bag pudding with currants in it to hide the soot. They had been obliged to put Tom Kitten into a very hot bath to get the butter off. John Joiner smelt the pudding, but he regretted that he had not the time to stay for dinner, because he had just finished making a wheelbarrow for Mrs. Potter, and she had ordered 2 hen coops. And when I was going to the post late in the afternoon, I looked up the lane on the corner, and I saw Mr. Samuel Whiskers and his wife on the run, and the big bundles on their little wheelbarrow, which looked very much like mine. Samuel Whiskers was puffing and huffing and out of breath. Anna Maria was still arguing in shrill tones. She seemed to know her way, but she seemed to have the quantity of luggage. I am sure I never gave her leave to borrow my wheelbarrow. They went into the barn and hauled their parcels with a bit of string to the top of the haymow. After that, there were no more rats for a very long time in Tabitha Twitchit's house. As for Farmer Potatoes, he has been driven nearly distracted. There are rats and rats and rats and rats and rats in his barn. They eat up the chicken food, and they steal the oats and the bran, and they make holes in the meal bags. And they are all descended from Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Whiskers. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. There is no end to them. Moppet and Mittens have grown up to be very, very good rat catchers. They go out rat catching into the village, and they find plenty of employment. They charge so much of a dozen and earn their living very comfortably. They hang up their tails in a row on the barn door to show how many rats that they've caught, dozens and dozens of them. But Tom Kitten has always been afraid of a rat. He never durst face anything that is bigger than a mouse. The end. So I hope you enjoyed that story. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. I hear somebody knocking at the door. Hang on just a moment. Hello. What are you doing here? I'm here. Oh, look who came to visit me. It's Mr. Packrat, Peter Packrat. I don't know if I liked that story. No. Well, you know, it's kind of sad how the rats had to move. But they did live forever, so that's okay. Oh, I think I see somebody. Do you do? Oh, it's Tom. Hi, everybody. Ah, there's a rat. There's a rat. I didn't mean to scare him. Okay.
Mr. Samuel. Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today, everybody.
So until next time, keep reading.